Sew as you go is a technique that allows us to join an existing fabric to a second fabric at the same time as the second fabric is being knitted. In this case, I'm sewing a band onto an already knitted body of a blanket, all in one step. But it is also used for multiple piece sweaters, blankets that are knitted in panels, all sorts of things. Here I've already E-wrapped the stitches that will become the next band. And this is only hung on here so that you can get a good look at the edge. Where my fingertip is tapping, that's what we refer to as a knot. Every other row makes a somewhat tighter stitch. The next one you'll see is looser, and we call that a bar. Sometimes the difference between them is not very much. It's not as much on the multicolored fabric in this project, but the yellow shows it up pretty well. You can hang either one, and you can hang a whole stitch or a half stitch. For the bottom edge, where this will be doubled, and I'll be closing it up at the same time as sewing as you go, I'm going to hang the bars, and I'm going to hang a half stitch, because we need the room that will afford us to get everything to knit off well. The body of the blanket has already been knitted along with the top and bottom hems. And for the hem, we'll be hanging it doubled as it is, as shown on the tool. There will be 2 layers. Here we are with the one-prong tool pushed through the first 2 bars. This is the bottom hem, and it's doubled. And we'll hang on this needle and knit 2 rows. At this point, I'm able to hang a weighted comb on, and I like to do so. It makes the rest easier. Now we'll look at this. I'm using this needle where I would normally use my left hand, because my left hand is holding the camera so you can get close. Those are the next 2 knots. So we're going to go under the next 2 bars, moving up from the bottom fold. And we'll bring these over, hang them, and of course I must release this because that's my imaginary left hand. If the machine has any trouble knitting this off, because you've got 3 strands of yarn, this yarn is not soft. So it sometimes does make a bumpy place that the carriage wants to stop. No problem. By bringing the needles all the way forward and letting the carriage knit back from hold, it goes more easily. Knit it 2 rows, and you're going to knit 2 rows between every time you hang. There are the next 2 knots. You can see they're kind of small. Here are the next 2 bars. 1, 2. I know it's difficult to identify them at first, but as you practice, they become more and more obvious. And again, of course, this must be released. It's my imaginary left hand. Now I'm going to bring all the needles forward and knit 2 rows and repeat that up to here, and then we're going to change methods. Next, we're going to hang the blanket edge itself. The yellow part is the hem that surrounds the blanket. This is the blanket, and it's a single thickness of fabric. Again, this needle is only functioning as my pretend left hand, so I can show you when I need to show you. Looking along here, you will see a loose stitch, a tighter stitch, loose, tighter, loose, tighter. It's more obvious if you roll the fabric, or unroll it rather, so that you can look exactly down the edge. And those little V-shaped or maybe heart shapes right there, with the point of the V or the heart toward the left of the picture, and the top where my thumb is in the orange stitch. They'll alternate loose and tight. The orange one we would call a knot. You can hang a whole knot on the appropriate needle to seam and knit 2 rows, or you can hang a whole bar stitch, or you can hang a single strand from either one of those. I choose based on what else is going on in the design. There's my single strand of the knot, and you can see it's much harder to locate and push your tool through. So that's going to make a tighter seam. For this particular purpose on this blanket, I have elected to hang the bars, but hang the whole stitch. When I say hang the whole column of stitches, what I just did is what I mean. See that there are 2 strands of yarn, in fact. That's the complete edge stitch. And now we'll do what we've been doing. Release this, but normally it would be in your left hand. Bring this forward and knit 2 rows. Here's the next stitch, just about ready to be hung. We'll hang it and knit 2 rows, sewing as we knit the band. Here's the development of the sew as you go. What's going to happen here, this is the right side of the blanket, the knit side. To finish up, we'll seam this edge over to here. You may do it from either direction. For example, had I been hanging this with the purl side showing, then the right side of the blanket would come out already seamed, and the sewn edge would be on the underside. And it comes out looking like this. Normally I do the same thing for both edges, but I wanted to show you all the options. It will look slightly different here than it's going to look on the other edge, because hand sewing this down does not look identical, and that's why I would normally pick one method and stay with it, but for this sample it's okay. Now here's the wrong side of the blanket already completed, the edge that we've been hanging. Let's hang a few more just for practice to make sure you have it clearly in your mind. Let's hang a few more just for practice to make sure you have it clearly in your mind. Let's take a closer look. This is where an edge has been hung, 2 rows knitted. Now we're hanging another piece in slow motion up close so you can really see. Here's another up close look at the motion. Picking up a pair of bars, hanging them on the end needle. Skipping the knot, picking up the next pair of bars, hanging them on the end needle. In each case, 2 rows were knitted between the hanging sessions. So let's do a quick review. You can hang either with the right side or the wrong side in view. If you hang with the wrong side in view, and that's with it flattened out, of course it will twist and roll and anything could be in view. But if I were looking at the purl side when I did this, then the knit side would come out with the finished seam when the work got off of the machine. Doing it as I am, with the right side in view, the knit side in view, the finished seam comes out on the purl side. If I wanted to hang this same piece and have the finished seam on the knit side, I should be hanging it at the other end of the band. Options that face us: whole column of stitches versus the very edge strand right there. Knot there, the orange one, versus bar, the looser stitch. You have multiple effects that can be achieved, and there's no right way and wrong way. It depends on what you want. What I'm doing now, hanging a whole stitch, will create a tighter looking seam that's also thicker than hanging a half a stitch. I would get an even tighter looking seam if I hung the knot. both strands of the knot. It's somewhat intermediate and looks slightly different to hang half of a knot. So I recommend that for blankets, for example, you go with a fairly tight seam. It doesn't have to be real tight seam because nobody's bra is showing through or anything. But it does not need to be thin, and I like the security of the whole stitch. Whereas if it was for a blouse, and this is a great technique for a blouse, it could be because you want the left pink and the right blue on the front. It could be because you have a plus size friend who needs a blouse. But if I tucked my tool right in there, that knot, but only using half of it, creates quite a tight seam that doesn't tend to show your underwear or skin through it, and is still flat, not very thick through. So there are a number of uses for the seam. It will behave differently to some degree with different yarns, and I suggest that based on the project you're doing and the yarn, and checking what your swatch looks like when you do a little sew as you go swatch, that's how you select. You may find that one method really suits you more than the others for most projects. The one I'm doing here is one I often choose. But it's all going to depend on personal taste and the kind of knitting you do. Here I am sewing the second edge of the band to the body of the blanket. This is the one where the seam was completed on the right side, and I'm now sewing it down to the wrong side, or purl side. The place where the main fabric joins the band makes a very obvious every other row place to stitch through. And then I'm also stitching through every other row on the edge of the band. And now it will all be one smooth piece. The edge of the blanket can't roll. It's nice and thick and stable. And in this case, I am sewing through the knots on the edge of the band. Here's what the edge looked like before the sewing but after the knitting. This is what the knit side of the fabric looks like when the purl side was in view while we hung and sew as we go. Here's a view of the two bands being joined at the edges. The same area from the front side of the blanket. The side hems have to have their two layers sewn together at the top and bottom at the cast on and bind off. And here that's been done. A close look at the sewing process here. Now we're looking at the alternate way of doing it. This is the one you saw me do the most, where the right side was in view as we hung, which results in our final finishing where we seam the second edge of the band to the rest of the blanket, taking place on the right side. I should really say on the knit side because either side could be used as the right side. Now here's a really close look at the needle making the sewing motion. You can see where it's going through. The ivory colored pointer is pointing to the next place that I will stitch through. That's after completing the stitch that's in progress now. Here are the two methods compared. The one on the top of the picture is the one that you saw me do, where we hung with the knit side in view. The one on the bottom of the picture, the main body of the blanket, was hung for the sew as you go process with the purl side in view.